Convening having arrived, the Senate will come to order. At this time, I'll ask the unauthorized persons to exit the chamber. I recognize the senator from the 53rd.
Let me unveil this. Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
It's a delight to have you here. Thank you for your leadership on this body and with the people of Georgia. We're honored to have you up there at the podium, and we appreciate your work and also the president's work too. The holidays today. It's Go Fishing Day, and the senator from the 8th told me when he retires from this body, he's going fishing, at least. The journal's been read and found to be correct, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there objection to dispensing with the reading of the journal? Hearing none, the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? Hearing none, the chair hears none, the journal is confirmed. All senators having bills and resolutions to introduce, please bring those to the Secretary's desk. First readers.
Senate Bill 519 by Senators Williams of the 39th, Jordan of the 6th, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 1-4-1 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to public and legal holidays and leave for observance of religious holidays not specifically provided for, so as to designate June 19th of each year as a state holiday of Juneteenth, to remove June 3rd as a potential state holiday, to provide for related matters, repeal conflicting laws for other purposes.
Government oversight.
Mr. President, that completes the order.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Secretary will read the reports of standing committees. Chair recognizes the senator from the 30th, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the rules be suspended to allow for first reading of Senate Resolution 987.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection, Secretary will read reports of standing committees. Oops. Secretary will read the resolution. Beg your pardon.
Senate Resolution 987 by Senator Tillery of the 19th and Dugan of the 30th, and a resolution recognizing the late Senator Jack Hill and renaming a state park in his honor.
Government oversight. Load up Senator Heath. He's on his way out. Secretary, read the report of standing committees.
Mr. President, the Senate Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Committee has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. HB 847 do pass. House Bill 894 do pass by substitute. House Bill 897 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Wilkinson of the 50th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Tourism has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 1008 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Ginn of the 47th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 957 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Martin of the 9th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 991 do pass by substitute. House Bill 789 do pass. House Bill 791 do pass by substitute. House Bill 1114 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Watson of the 1st District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 912, do pass by substitute. House Bill 555, do pass. House Bill 865, do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Stoner, the 23rd District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 838, do pass. House Bill 861, do pass. House Bill 487, do pass. House Bill 1017, do pass. House Bill 463, do pass by substitute. House Bill 576, do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Albers of the 56th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Retirement Committee has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 195, do pass. House Bill 245, do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Black of the 8th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Institutions and Property has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 848, do pass. House Bill 953, do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harbison of the 15th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Government Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 509, do pass. Senate Bill 512, do pass. House Bill 884, do pass. House Bill 1110, do pass. House Bill 1087, do pass. House Bill 661, do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Veterans, Military, and Homeland Security has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 819, do pass. House Bill 907, do pass. House Bill 914, do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Thompson, the 14th District Chair. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Are you sure that completes the order? The Secretary will read the bills and resolutions for the second time.
House Bill 793 by Representative Ralston of the 7th, General Appropriations, State Fiscal Year July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021. House Bill 932 by Representative Gaines of the 117th and others, Georgia Podiatry Practice Act, Podiatric Medicine and Surgery, change certain provisions. House Bill 966 by Representative Burchett of the 176th and others, Conservation and Natural Resources, regulate the harvest and sale of palmetto berries. House Bill 987 by Representative Cooper of the 43rd and others, Health, additional measures for the protection of elderly persons provide. Mr. President, that completes the order.
It is, thank you, sir. It's now time for our morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Any motions to excuse? Without objection and without motions to excuse, I recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that we suspend the morning roll call.
The Majority Leader has asked unanimous consent to dispense with the morning roll call. Is there objection? Hearing none, the roll call is now dispensed with. It is now time for our morning devotion. All senators, please take your seats and cease all audible conversation. I would like to ask the doorkeepers to secure the chamber at this time, and I recognize the senator, my good friend, the senator from the 10th, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and introduce the chaplain of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. We all stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag, principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, moderation. It is my great honor to introduce to some and present to others the Reverend Dr. Roy P. Jones, Jr., who is the executive minister of St. Philip's AME Church in Atlanta, where Dr. William D. Haley is the senior pastor. Dr. Jones was born and raised in Arkansas. He retired as a Master Sergeant, E8, in the United States Army. Thank you for your service, Pastor. He served well over 23 years. He has been married to Angela Green Jones for over 27 years. They have been blessed with 4 beautiful daughters. Kim Yasha, a graduate from University of Central Arkansas. Atavia, a graduate from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. Olivia, a senior at North Carolina A&T. And Iona, a sophomore in high school. He and his lovely wife have 2 grandchildren. Dr. Jones is a prolific author and writer. Among his books are It's Praying Time Because Prayer Still Works, Messages from the Young Adults, Teen Youth, Lessons Learned from the Book of Deuteronomy, Advancing the Kingdom, Rescue and Restoration of an African American Community, Leading from the Church Through Education, Divine Revelation for Divine Restoration, The Cost of Discipleship, and 40 Days Alone with God. Another book that he's written is Meditations for Spiritual Renewal, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Dr. Jones earned an AA from Southern Arkansas University Tech in Camden, Arkansas, a BS from Excelsior College in Albany, New York, a master's in divinity from Anchor Theological Seminary in Texarkana, Arkansas, and a master's in pastoral counseling, MRE, and chaplainship. Pastor, we may need you here today to help us, by the way. And his master's in divinity, preaching and leadership from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. Dr. Jones, let me personally ask that you pray for me and members of this body that we will come together and pass a hate crime bill, House Bill 426. And Dr. Jones, when you pray, let me just ask that you pray for all those black lives out there that we know that matter, particularly with the senseless police violence that we've experienced in this country. And when you pray, I ask that you pray for those little black boys and girls that are trying to understand the significance of this moment, and not just this nation's history, but the world's history. And when you pray, Dr. Jones, pray for divine intervention in the hearts and minds of those that feel that privilege is inherited and not earned. And I say that when you pray, pray that America will truly live up to her calling of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of its citizens, regardless of race, sex, creed, or even the color of their skin. And Pastor Jones, when you pray, please pray that I can breathe. I introduce to you our pastor today, Dr. Jones.
Good morning. This is a great day, and I'm grateful that Senator Emanuel Jones has invited me. I'm grateful for President Pro Tem Butch Miller and his leadership, and just want to share a word to encourage you. We stand at a very critical time in history, in America and the world, and also in the state of Georgia. God has blessed us, so let us go to Luke, the 10th chapter. Just want to encourage you and praying that God will open our eyes, that we might see, and that we might be doers of his word and not hearers only. Luke chapter 10, verse number 25 through 37, it says these words. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, thy soul, and thy mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he looked and he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and he gave 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any expenses you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Just want to remind you that we have a moment in time and history that we can make a great difference in the life of this country and those who are around us. But don't miss your moment. The man asked Jesus, "What must I do?" And that's the question for all of us as individuals and as leaders. What must I do? And I encourage you that in this season, in history, and in your life, and as leaders, don't miss your moment. There's 5 things that stand out, and I will not take up much of your time. Number 1 is compassion. The man had compassion. Number 2 is courage. Number 3 is commitment. Number 4, communication. And number 5 is a contribution. I challenge each of us who are here today, for the rest of our lives, if we would show compassion towards one another, if we would have the courage to make a difference, if we will be committed, make a commitment to change the conditions around you. And 4, communicate with one another. And number 5, leave a contribution that will allow the person that you left to be in a better condition when you come again. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, we come to say thank you for an opportunity to serve. We say thank you because you have been good to us. But we pray in the name of Jesus that you would strengthen our hands for the works that you've called us to do. We pray that you would give us a mind to work. We know that you breathe the breath of life in all of us, and we pray that we will show mercy so that others can breathe as well. God, we pray that you will touch our hearts, that we may live up to our true call of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We pray that we will represent you in all that we say and do. We pray that regardless of our race, our sex, and our creed, or the color of our skin, that we will love one another. We pray because we believe that prayer still works. We pray that we don't miss our moment in history. We don't miss our moment to pass legislation that will make a difference in the lives of those who need us in times like these. We pray that we see that black lives really does matter. We pray that we will see that young boys and girls, especially those who of color, will understand that this moment in history will never be duplicated, but it will be a time in history that will change the course of time. We pray that, Lord, you would be with this body, that they will pass the legislation that will make a difference now and forevermore. In the name of the Lord we pray, amen. God bless you.
I would invite all senators to come down and greet Reverend Roy Jones and thank the senator from the 10th from having him in the chamber today. Are there any unanimous consents? Does any senator wish to rise for a point of personal privilege? Recognize the senator from the 53rd. Recognize the senator from the 53rd for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
I would like to talk about procedures around here. You know, you would think that sometimes just a casual conversation perhaps, or a congenial courtesy conversation about when you have a bill before somebody's committee. You would think that maybe just come into the Rules Chair in the Senate and say, Mr. Chair, I've got a bill in your committee. I'd like for it to have a chance to go to the floor. And that would be all you need. But the House Rules Committee has this enormous form to fill out. I think one question may be, what is your favorite color? Or what is your zodiac sign and how does it affect the bill? It's just ridiculous. So I have decided, Mr. President, to create our own form for a House member to get their bill out of rules.
Hear ye, hear ye.
And right here it is. So House members, you have to fill out this little old form now if you want a bill out of Senate rules. And I'd recommend every committee member, chair in the Senate, to create their own form too, so that we don't miss anything. So maybe we're not disillusioned of something that might be in the bill, that we have to have more people making the decision to put a bill on the floor. So this is our new form for House members to get a bill out of Senate rules. Mr. Chairman, I'm here in the Senate chamber or outside the Senate chamber in my office if anybody ever needs to consult with me on a bill that they may have before Senate rules. But this is a new little old form for House members to fill out to get a bill out of Senate rules. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well and have a good day. I need some help rolling this up, though. It's taking some time. But there are questions on here of great importance that we need to know before we allow a bill to go through the process. I yield the well.
As they said in the movie Blazing the Saddles, roll that thing out one more time. Recognize Senator from the 14th, point of personal privilege. He waves off. Recognize Senator from the 12th.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. To my colleagues, this is not a touchy-feely point of personal privilege this morning, but I feel compelled to say something. Once again, I rise for Baker, Calhoun, Clay, Doherty, Mitchell, Quitman, Randolph, Sumter, Stewart, Terrell, and Webster counties, the heart of Southwest Georgia and a part of rural America. District 12 avoided complete economic disaster, and we too are definitely open for common sense business. Although we continue to work through the misery of tremendous human and economic losses resulting from COVID-19, the horrific deaths of young black males, and constant divisive rhetoric from multiple sources throughout the country. Economic expansion in the United States, especially this great state of Georgia, is contingent upon leadership, strong, inclusive leadership, with respect to others' ideas, principles, abilities, and above all, the color of one's skin. If we decide that one group is the chosen one, while dismissive towards others, Georgia will not continue to have economic success. If we decide that certain parts of the state are not worth economic investment and we just write them off, then you have created a schism of desperation and despair for the least of them. The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 took place on May 31st and June 1st, 1921, when mobs of white residents attacked black residents and businesses of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It has been called the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. But it appears in history books as a very, very tiny and obscure footnote. Over 300 black men and women and children were murdered. The town was looted and ravaged by whites. And because of segregationist laws, there was absolutely no discernible reason to destroy a peaceful black hamlet once known as the Black Wall Street of America. You see, these individuals segregated themselves. They built their own economic system, which provided them with economic freedom and parity. Those who do not know their history or study it are doomed to repeat it, whether it's good or bad. My good friend, Reverend Bobby Willis of Quitman County, often tells me that there are two spiritual laws, only two: sowing and reaping. Therefore, if you want a different harvest, you must change what you plant. You can't harvest peanuts if you planted corn. As Black Americans, we are weary of paying for the sins of our fathers, sins they never really committed, but continue to receive the blame. We were brought from foreign lands to help build this country, and it is our home too. Those of us that are students of history, economics, class warfare, as well as racial injustice, really don't expect much in the way of change. But in the end, we just want to have our say. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, Senator, for your passionate words, and I would ask all senators to give those in the well their undivided attention and to keep conversation to an absolute minimum. I'd also ask those in the well to be respectful of the times allotted for speaking. Call upon the senator from the 35th for a point of personal privilege.
I thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I've received hundreds of calls, emails about this one issue, and it is, please don't stifle our voices. You see, your voice matters when you vote. And the whole question and the whole comments have been about voter integrity. And as we all know, voting is one of the most important rights and responsibilities we have as U.S. citizens. And despite the fact that 150 million citizens are qualified to vote, many of them don't, unfortunately. But what about those who do go to the polls, who try to vote, especially those elderly who stood in line from 1 to 5 hours just a couple of weeks ago in the primary? We had too many precincts that were opening 1 and 2 hours late. The delays did not stop those who wanted to vote. They stayed in line. Many of them were almost crippled as I appear to be right now. So they had to bring chairs, or someone had to bring them water. But they stood there to exercise their right to vote. We must protect the voter integrity. Voting, again, is just the way we have to represent. And you see, many citizens, especially young ones, go the extra mile to make sure their voice is heard. And it's represented by the demonstrations of protesting and signing petitions and using social media to spread their message. But they too are angry about having applied for absentee ballots. They came in the mail and it was wonderful. They filled them out and they sent them in, but the ballot never ever arrived. They kept waiting for the ballot to arrive. And early voting ended. Everybody had to go and get in line if they really wanted to vote. This is the cry that I'm hearing from the people. They think that they're crying out and nobody's listening. So I stand before you today and I ask you to let's not repeat this in November. Let's make sure that their voices are heard. Let's make sure that we correct all the problems that we had in this last, and drop boxes were locked. Some people finally got their ballots and they tried to go to the drop box and they were locked. So, yes, COVID-19 pandemic has certainly impacted the way we live and perhaps even the way that we use the ballot box. But let's make it easy. I'm going to take my seat, but remember, they social distanced, they did everything right, and numerous issues, including the COVID-19, still arose higher and higher. It's our responsibility. We are the decision makers in the process of who becomes elected to serve and speak on behalf of public office. Let's let our constituents' voices be heard and make those decisions. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Call upon the senator from the 42nd for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week's primary election once again had Georgia in the national spotlight as incapable of holding a fair and efficient election. Across the state, the election has been referred to with very choice adjectives, such as a fiasco, a debacle, a catastrophe, and a complete meltdown. It went so poorly that it caused even some Republicans to call for the resignation of the Secretary of State. While it was indeed a disaster, I must acknowledge that Secretary Raffensperger's action sending absentee ballot applications to many Georgia voters helped mitigate the situation. It is clear that had that step not been taken, the lines on Election Day would have been much longer. In my district, almost 2/3 of the people who voted in the primary voted absentee by mail. And even with that, there were precincts in my district where folks waited in line for hours. Let's be clear, hours-long waits, up to 8 hours in some places, disenfranchised Georgia voters, is totally unacceptable, and we need to fix it. And this was not a problem limited to Fulton and DeKalb counties. Precincts were ordered to stay open late in 20 counties in all corners of the state. But at the same time, it was troubling that many of the longest waits occurred in precincts where a majority of voters are minorities. The first problem was the new ballot marking devices that the majority party forced every county in Georgia to use, at times over their objections, and despite the warnings of computer scientists, voting experts, and every Democratic member of this body, among others. We said, when HB 316 was being debated, that Georgia was embarking on a very expensive purchase of complicated and insecure machines. Hand-marked paper ballots with optical scanners, we said, were a more secure and cost-effective alternative that would also increase efficiencies and eliminate lines. We warned that a new complicated system of this magnitude could not be rolled out successfully on the compressed timetable insisted upon. And in retrospect, we were right. But now let's look toward the future, toward November. It's clear we have work to do to prevent the November election, where we may see 3 times as many voters, from suffering the same issues that disenfranchised Georgians last week. First, we call on the Secretary of State to send every voter a ballot. Not an application, but a ballot. There's no good reason this can't happen. There isn't a choice on the general for whether a voter is picking a Democratic, Republican, or nonpartisan ballot. We also need to ensure that we have enough voting machines and e-poll books. It's evident that we need much more technical support and training on these new machines. A couple other brief legislative items, Mr. President, and I see that my time has expired. We should also pass SB 409, my bipartisan bill to allow voters to sign up once to continue to receive absentee ballots instead of having to request one each time. That legislation is common sense and has not received a hearing. As an alternative, we can also open vote centers on Election Day. However, I'm also filing legislation that would allow voters to vote in any precinct in the county in which they're registered. We should also change the state law that requires poll workers only work in a county where they live. There's no good reason for that requirement, and with many experienced poll workers uncomfortable serving due to the pandemic, we shouldn't artificially limit our pool of those willing to serve. Georgians must be able to have confidence in our elections. There is much at stake, and the onus is on us and the Secretary of State to run an election that goes much better in November. The world is watching. Thank you, Mr. President.
Call upon the senator from the 29th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Prior to being sworn in and serving in this body, I had a heart-to-heart conversation with our illustrious Rules Chair, and he pointed out the importance of standing in this position and how if you used it every day to promote this and to promote that, that at some point you lose the fire and the energy behind your passions. And during my first session, I adhered to that, and during this session, I think I have too. But there are times when things rise up that I think require us to stand before our colleagues and convey our concerns. While attending the FBI National Academy in 2010, I made really good friends with a couple of law enforcement officers from the city of Philadelphia. And I had the opportunity to laugh and pick on them a little bit about the city slogan, the city of brotherly love. And I'm sure all of you have seen the famous video of Santa Claus visiting Philadelphia and being pelted with snowballs and everything else, and which showed the irony of the city of brotherly love as the slogan. Well, I've discovered that irony once again. Yesterday afternoon, I experienced had the opportunity to watch a press conference held by a local district attorney. And I listened during his obviously political speech to his various accusations, untruths, and other things, which made it ironic. Because there's a t-shirt I wear and I've had for several years, and it's one of my most comfortable t-shirts, but it's a t-shirt that sends a message that I feel that applies to me. And it says, "Too busy to hate." And I now see the irony in it, because I've seen leadership that they may claim to be too busy to hate, but what I've discovered is apparently they're too busy to understand due process. They're too busy to understand the constitutional rights of law enforcement officers. They're too busy to take politics out of public safety. They're too busy talking about how law enforcement officers here in the city of Atlanta with the Atlanta Police Department should focus on their commitment to the city of Atlanta. I want to be perfectly clear. Law enforcement officers are not committed to politicians. They're not committed to bullies above them who want to push them around. They're committed to the men, women, and children who live within the jurisdiction that they work for. They're certainly not committed to large salaries, huge benefits. As corny as it sounds, many law enforcement officers enter the career to make our state a better place, to make their community a better place and a safer place. The officers of the Atlanta Police Department are victims. They are victims of a broken prosecutor's office that told blatant untruths on a case that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has not completed investigating yet. These officers, these men, women, these investigators, black, white, male, female, are victims. They're victims of crimes, and I want them to know, and I want every law enforcement officer, every public safety officer in the state of Georgia to know that it's time for us to stand with them. And I will definitely stand with every law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia. Mr. President, thank you, and I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. I call upon Senator from the 48th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today because I have been demanded to speak. In the last 24 hours, I have received hundreds of emails from young people in my district. Young people who are very concerned about the cuts to education. Young people who cry out for their opportunity, for the American dream. I think you all know that I grew up on welfare and food stamps in rural northwest Georgia. One of the brightest lights of my time in high school was the Governor's Honors Program. I share with you today, I still have my t-shirt. GHP sock stud. I studied social studies. Funny, I ended up here. Zara, 84. Folks, this is a life-changing program. I had never been to South Georgia, Valdosta, where this program was held. I went to Valdosta, and I see we have the senator here from that district proudly representing, and I was there for social studies that summer. 6 weeks with the brightest minds across Georgia. I was exposed to so many new ways of thinking about things. We also had a mock convention, and I was actually selected to be the obscure Geraldine Ferraro until all of a sudden she was selected to be the vice presidential running mate with President Mondale. So I was thrust into a new role. And for a little girl from North Georgia who had never seen or done anything, much less heard of Geraldine Ferraro, it was life-changing. These same young people who have experienced this program are very concerned about the cuts to education, moving millions out of the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, which has done many, many things for our state, and eliminating the Governor's Honors Program, which is the longest continuously running governor's school in the United States. I, for one, refuse to balance this budget on the backs of our children. It has been done way too many times. And again, I stand against it. There are better ways to do this budget, and you all know we have to be creative. But we cannot again fail our children as we have done in the past. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any motions to withdraw or commit? Hello.
Thank you,
Recognizing
Mr.
Senator from 30th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the House bills that are set forth on the consent calendar for withdrawal and commit be withdrawn from the Committee on Assignments and assigned to the committees as indicated on the consent calendar.
Thank you. The majority leader has asked for unanimous consent that the House bills set forth on the consent calendar for bills to be withdrawn and committed to be withdrawn from the Committee on Assignments and assigned to the committees as indicated on the consent calendar. Is there objection to the assignment of the bills as set forth on the consent calendar? Hearing none. Hearing none. Recognize the Senator from the 41st.
Are you acting on the local consent calendar?
Withdraw and commit. Now hearing none. The bills on the consent calendar to withdraw and commit are therefore assigned to the committees as indicated. Moving to the local consent calendar. If you have consent calendar local bills before you, Mr. Secretary, are there any objections to file any of the local consent calendar? Recognize the Senator from the 45th.
Inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it the proper time to take a bill off the consent calendar?
This would be the proper time.
I would like to make the motion to withdraw House Bill 661 from the local consent calendar.
Okay. Senator, there's a procedure for doing that, and 3 senators have to file a form for objection. Recognize Minority Leader. Come back to you.
President, if you could just pause for a second. 2 senators, if Senator would come over and sign it. We've got 2 senators already have signed the form for objection. Senator 45th, did you sign it too? Okay. If you would just pause for a second, that objection will be put in. There is another situation, Mr. President. The bill actually is improperly and against Senate rules on the calendar because it should have been signed by all the members of the county, but it was only put in for the signatures of the city of Norcross. So we're trying to rectify that. And if you just pause for 1 second, we'll hand you the objection.
With the senators on the 41st approach and 45th.
Mr. President, there has been objection filed to House Bill 661. Steve.
House Bill 661 will be removed from the calendar. State your inquiry.
Parliamentary inquiry. I'd like to know, Mr. President, since it's being taken off House Bill 661, the proper procedure would be to file contest for tomorrow. Is that correct? I just want to know the direction to go.
I understand. If you will come and speak to the secretary, we'll make sure we get it straightened out and make sure it's properly handled.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. You have the consent calendar of local bills before you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any objections filed to any bill on the local consent calendar?
There's an objection filed on House Bill 661.
The remainder of the bills on the consent calendar are before you. Is there objection to agreeing to the consent calendar? Hearing none. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the consent calendar? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. The question is on the passage of the bills on local consent calendar. All those in favor will vote yea, and all those opposed will vote nay. Mr. Secretary, if you'll unlock the machines. Senator from the 37th, will you approach? On the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 44, the nays are 0, and the bills having received the requisite constitutional majority, therefore passed. Oh. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Move with a purpose. Move with a purpose. Have all senators voted? So I tell my kids when they're growing up, move with a purpose, boys, move with a purpose. Have all senators voted? All senators, vote your machines. Waiting on the Have all senators voted? All senators having voted? Okay. All senators have voted. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 46. We've got to close the machines. Mr. Secretary, if you'll close the voting machines. On the passage of the bill, on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 46 and the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Recognize the senator from the 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate immediately transmit Senate Bill 509 to the House.
Is there objection to unanimous consent to immediately transmit Senate Bill 509 to the House of Representatives? Hearing none, Mr. Secretary, if you'll transmit. We're now moving to the rules calendar. Third reading of the consideration of general bills and resolutions. We have a local contested calendar with House Bill number 661 on it. Mr. Secretary, would you address the chamber?
Read the caption. House Bill 661 to be entitled, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act creating a new charter for the city of Norcross, Georgia.
Recognize the senator from the 5th to speak to the bill. Recognize the senator from the 5th to speak to the bill. Recognize the senator from the 41st.
Mr. President, I move to table HB 661.
Is there objection to moving to table House Bill 661? Hearing none, we move to table the bill. Now, finally, we're moving on to the rules calendar. I recognize the senator from the 50th. Secretary will read House Bill 823.
House Bill 823 by Representative Gaines of the 117th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend code sections 16-5-46 and 40-5-151 of the official code of Georgia annotated relating to trafficking of persons for labor or sexual servitude and disqualification from driving a commercial motor vehicle and action required after suspending, revoking, or canceling license or non-resident privileges respectively, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Senator Albers of the 56th District Chair.
Recognize the senator from the 56th to speak to the bill, and he is ready to go. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, if I could have your attention, please. This is a very important piece of legislation. Let me begin by thanking our governor and our First Lady, Marty Kemp, who have had a great passion, like many of us in this chamber, to combat and end human trafficking. This horror sadly still exists in our world and even in our state. The governor created the Grace Commission, which is led by the First Lady, Director of GBI, and a host of other pillars in our state. They've been working to find best practices and to work with our community in order to impact meaningful change. I want to take a moment and specifically thank the senator from the 45th for her tremendous work against human trafficking throughout her tenure in the Capitol. This bill is relatively short and simple, but very meaningful. Oftentimes, people are trafficked by using commercial means in trucks and containers. This bill says that if someone is convicted by doing that, they will never be able to keep nor obtain their commercial driver's license again. The punishment certainly will fit the crime. If there are questions, Mr. President, I will yield. If not, I will yield the will.
Recognize the senator from 35th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, isn't it true that I had a bill to stop human cargo, which is very, 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 very similar to this bill?
Senator, I'm sure you did. I know you have also been a champion, like the senator from the 45th, on this very issue.
Well, my bill is stuck in committee and never had a hearing, but I think this is something that we need to address. So, I don't care who gets the credit, but I did do a lot of research for the past 3 years on this, so I thank the First Lady for bringing it forth.
Thank you, Senator.
Are there any other questions for the senator? Hearing none. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Hearing none. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Good. Good. Secretary, will you lock the machine? On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 48, the nays are 0. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. The Secretary will now read House Bill 983.
House Bill 983 by Representative Williams of the 145th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 1 of Title 42 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to Sexual Offender Registration Review Board so as to revise the information required to be provided by sexual offenders when they register and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends this bill do pass by substitute. Senator Stone of the 23rd District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Judiciary Committee offers the following substitute to House Bill 983, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 1 of Title 42 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to Sexual Offender Registration Review Board so as to revise the information required to be provided by sexual offenders when they register to allow a sexual offender who is in a state or privately operated hospice facility, skilled nursing home, or residential health care facility with the approval of the sheriff of that county where such sexual offender resides to satisfy the annual registration requirements by registering at any time and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Thank you. I recognize the senator from the 25th District to speak to House Bill 983.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I rise before you to present House Bill 983, which actually pertains to one facility here in the state in Milledgeville, Georgia. It's a facility that was built several years ago to be a nursing home facility for inmates within the Department of Corrections. And quite frankly, most of the inmates who are now elderly, about 125 of them are in prison because of being sexual predators and offenders. So they have to register every year as that, and it's up to the local law enforcement it's up to them to do that. And what this bill essentially does is, instead of our local sheriff going out to the facility 125 different times during the course of the year, it narrows their focus where they only have to go out to the facility once a month to register the sex offenders. And it's going to make better use of our sheriff's time and probably make it a little more efficient than the way it's currently being done. So I yield for any questions. And Mr. President.
Senator, you have no questions. Oh,
Come right in.
I'm sorry. Senator from the 48th.
Does the chairman yield?
I do.
I direct you to lines 499 and 500, which talks about collecting the annual $250 registration fee from the sex offender.
Yes.
Is the sex offender still required to pay the $250 fee?
That's a good question, Senator. I actually stopped on that line myself in reading through the bill, and because it gave me pause, and I had to contact the author in the House about it, as well as Ledge Counsel. The sheriff was collecting the fees, and the sheriff no longer wants to collect the fees. He'd rather the Department of Corrections collect the fees because he was collecting them and then sending them on to the department. He'd rather not be obligated to do that and allow the Department of Corrections to collect those fees on their behalf. Thank you.
Senator, you have no further questions.
Thank you.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair hears none. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor will vote yea, opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. Recognize the senator from the 31st.
Mr. President, would it be possible to get the secretary to dim the lights over the rostrum? When we're watching on the monitors out here, there's a lot of glare.
That is a non-germane request. Would the senator from the 31st come back and actually vote his machine? Thank you. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Secretary will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 50, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. The chair recognizes the senator from the 51st.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that House Bill 545 be taken from the table.
Here. Secretary, will you read the caption?
House Bill 545 by Representative McCall of the 33rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 41-1-7 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to treatment of agricultural facilities and operations and forest lands as nuisances and for other purposes.
The senator has asked for unanimous consent to remove House Bill 545 from the table. Is there objection? The question is on the table. The question is to remove House Bill 545 from the table. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. Mr. Minority Leader, what is your inquiry?
Mr. President, is it not true that this is a very controversial measure that was put on the table before because of a lot of opposition, and it will take a considerable time to do, probably disrupting other important legislation that needs to be done?
Minority Leader is passionate about what he speaks. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Secretary, lock the machine. On the motion to remove from the table, the yeas are 31 and the nays are 22. The motion has prevailed, and HB 545 is removed from the table. HB 545 will go to the bottom of the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, will you read HB 326?
House Resolution 326 by Representative Houston of the 170th and others, a resolution recognizing Mr. Roger C. Dill and dedicating a building in his honor. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State Institutions and Property recommends that this resolution do pass. Senator Harbison of the 15th District, Chair.
I recognize the senator from the 7th District to speak to House Resolution 326.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, House Resolution 326 simply names the Tifton DOT, Department of Transportation District Office in Tifton, Georgia, for Roger Dill. This was an effort by Representative Houston and the late Senator Kirk, but is also supported by the senator from the 13th who represents Tifton. But Roger was a native and was born in Irwin County, my home county, in Ocilla, Georgia. He spent 23 years with the Georgia Department of Transportation, had a distinguished career, and has been significantly supportive of economic development projects in South Georgia. I would appreciate your help in helping us honor Roger and his commitment to Georgia and rural South Georgia in particular. And by naming the Tifton DOT office in his honor. If there are no questions, Mr. President, I will yield the will.
Senator, you have no questions. Does any senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair hears none. The senator from the 7th District is recognized to close the debate. Nothing? Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none and the main question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor of the resolution will vote yea, opposed nay. Mr. Secretary, unlock the machine. Everyone has checked their machine and ensured that they have voted. Everyone has, thank you. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? On the adoption of the resolution, Mr. Secretary, please lock the machine. On the adoption of the resolution, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 0. The resolution having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore adopted. Mr. Secretary, read the caption for House Bill 545.
House Bill 545 by Representative McCall and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 41-1-7 of the Official Code of Georgia relating to the treatment of agricultural facilities and operations and forest land as nuisances, so as to provide for legislative intent and remove a definition to limit the circumstances under which agricultural facilities and operations may be sued for a nuisance. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Agriculture has recommended that this bill do pass by substitute. The Senate Committee on Agriculture offers the following substitute to House Bill 545. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 41-1-7 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to the treatment of agricultural facilities and operations and forest land as nuisances, so as to provide for legislative intent to remove definitions to limit the circumstances under which agricultural facilities and operations may be sued for nuisance, to provide for a statute of limitations, to provide for attorney fees, to provide for a short title. Mr. President, a minority report has been filed and is on the desk. Mr. President, we have 3 amendments. Amendment number 1 by Senator Stone of the 23rd and Ligon of the 3rd to amend LC 44-1394S by deleting, beginning on line 109, quote, the alleged nuisance occurs within 2 years of the operation of an agricultural operation or facility, end quote, and by deleting on line 111, quote, right of action accrues and insert in lieu thereof the nuisance occurs. Amendment number 2 by Senator Black of the 8th and Wilkinson of the 50th offer the following amendment. Amend the substitute to House Bill 545 by inserting to provide for a definition, to provide for a buffer for rural residential development after, quote, fees on line 5, by inserting to provide for an effective date after matters on line 6, by replacing lines 152 and 153 with the following. Asserted an affirmative defense in nuisance action that was frivolous or malicious. For the purposes of this subsection, the term rural area means any county of this state that has a population of less than 50,000 according to the latest decennial census of the United States. Amendment number 3 by Senators Black and others offer the following amendment. Amend the substitute to House Bill 545 by inserting, quote, to provide for no preemption of federal regulations, end quote, after fees on line 5, by inserting to provide for an effective date after matters on line 6, and by replacing lines 152 and 153 with the following. Asserted an affirmative defense in a nuisance action that was frivolous or malicious. Mr. President, that completes the order.
The amendments are being passed out as we speak. I recognize the senator from the 50th District to speak to House Bill 545.
Mr. Leader, members of the Senate, I got a feeling a lot of you think this is really going to be drawn out and that kind of thing. we've been working on this bill for over a year. Most of you in here are familiar with it. I hope that you'll take a hard look at it today. I'm just going to try to summarize the bill and some of the major points, and I'll attempt to answer your questions. Now, I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to try to play who's the best lawyer with you, because I can't do that. But let me tell you one of the main reasons for this bill. This bill addresses vagueness and ambiguity in code in Georgia. Now, one of the reasons that we're going to have such a drawn-out conversation today, and I have great respect for everyone's occupation, so don't get me wrong, but I don't know whether you're aware of this fact, but there are 32, as of 2018, according to census figures, there are 32,802 active lawyers in Georgia. There are 19,858 farmers in Georgia. So I really don't, you know, those aren't good odds for the people from the farm community. Now, people have asked me, I'm just going to try to boil it down in terms that people like me can understand, and then I'm sure you'll have other people explain it a totally different way. But people say, why do you need this law? We've got a right to farm. We've got a right to farm law now. Well, in Georgia right now, let me tell you what you can do. You can have a farm in Valdosta. You can have a person who lives in Calhoun in North Georgia, and they can sue that farmer for a nuisance. This law requires that if you're going to sue for a nuisance, you have to live within 5 miles of where the nuisance is occurring. This bill also states that if you're going to file a nuisance claim, you have to own the land that the nuisance is impacting. Basically, what it does is clarify a lot of the things that are at this time left up to the judgment of a judge, and it puts it back in Georgia code in the legislative hands. Now, I read the minority report, and with all respect, I know that sounds good. And look, we've had a lady put an article in our local paper 2 weeks ago, and she said passing this bill is the equivalent of taking everyone's guns away from them. So I know there are people in here brighter than I am, but when you're giving me a hard time on this bill today, I just want you to explain to me how this equates with taking everyone's guns away from them. Now, I'm going to tell you what's actually happening today. A lot of you put these articles out about this person and, oh, they've got a nuisance claim and that kind of thing. You need to check that out, because I'm going to tell you what part of that is, because I've checked that out. I've worked on this bill for 1.5 years. And I think even attorneys would agree with this. There's nothing any more emotional when people have land and possessions, and someday when it's divided up with a will, when it doesn't work out the way all the heirs want it to. And in one of these cases in particular, the motivation behind spending all this money is because one of the family members didn't get the parcel of land that they wanted. And one of their relatives sold it to someone else and didn't sell it to them. So even though they live 200 miles away, and there's not any nuisance impacting them, they file suit, and they've said, we'll just keep filing suit. We'll just run them out of business, and we'll make it where they can't afford to farm, and we'll get the land that way. We'll whip them that way. Now that's a fact. This bill would not supersede any county regulation, state regulation, or federal regulation. You know, there seems to be a concern about, well, what if they come in here and do this and contaminate the water and do these things? EPD still got control over that. EPA still has control over that. It doesn't supersede any zoning regulations. They say, well, what if it changes this? You know, I live in a little bitty county that doesn't have a lot of zoning regulations, but if you change your regulations significantly, you have to get a new permit, or you have to go before the zoning board, and the local people have to decide that. I'm just going to close my remarks by saying this, and I'm going to make a feeble attempt to answer some of your questions. But I will say this. During my career, I've been in all 159 counties in the state of Georgia more than one time. I've been in all 181 school systems in the state of Georgia more than one time. For 26 years, I averaged traveling 35,000 miles a year. And so I feel like I know a little bit about this state. And Georgia has a booming agricultural economy that makes a $75 billion impact on our state. The leading export going out of Savannah, is poultry products. A lot of it comes from North Georgia. But people are not going to be able to continue to farm, and they're not going to be able to invest millions of dollars in equipment and agricultural facilities if there's as much ambiguity as there is now, and they don't understand what they can do and what they can't do. This bill brings clarity, and it tells them what the rules are, and I think it's fair to the farmers. Only 1% of our population farms the land now, but they produce enough food for everybody in America and other people around the world. The American farmer produces the most abundant, best quality, lowest price food in the world. Think about what it would have been like when we started the pandemic. We had to worry about toilet paper and paper towels. What if there had been no food on the shelves? What kind of scenario would we have dealt with? And I know a lot of people think, oh, that'll never happen. Well, I tell you, if you just keep opening up for these lawsuits, for the big developers, you talk about corporate agriculture, 88% of the farms in Georgia are family operations. What about the people that want to move in on the farmer and put a development in or whatever, and they've got the money and they can just continue to sue them with no clarity, continue to sue them and just run them out of business and take it and put a development there? Now, that's what's going to happen. I've done everything that I can on this bill. We've worked on this bill. We've made changes to this bill. Nothing personal. I'm going to tell you how I feel about the amendments. I can't support amendment number 1, not just because it was 2 lawyers that signed it, but they are my friends. I do support amendment number 2 and amendment number 3. I'm going to tell you, the farmer's been beat up and taken advantage of and overlooked. This is your opportunity to take a stand for the Farmers' Day. I urge a yes vote, and with those comments, Mr. President, if there are no questions, I would be happy to yield the well and just vote on this thing.
Senator, you do have questions.
Okay.
The chair recognizes the senator from the 6th for questions.
Thank you. Will the senator yield?
I will.
I appreciate that you want to remedy vagueness and ambiguity in the code of Georgia. I really do. My questions really have to do with vagueness and ambiguity with respect to what's in front of us, though. Specifically, my question is, and you can turn to, I'm looking at lines 125 to 132, and this is subsection E. Now, there are various conditions that are listed that would basically reset the time and the statute of limitations with respect to a nuisance action, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay. So in subsection F, though, it indicates that for any of these conditions to restart the statute of limitations, they would have to be basically subject to approval either by state EPD federal agencies?
And they would be subject to the zoning ordinances in the counties.
Okay, so this is my question. My question is then, if you have, and specifically for small farm operations, right, that make changes to technology or whatever, or even larger ones that aren't subject to the approval process, because everything you do when you're a farmer isn't necessarily subject to getting a permit, correct?
If you make a major change in your land use, this is my personal opinion, I would think if it was going to be something that would create a challenge here, that it would be subject to what's talked about here in the bill. That's my opinion.
So just for purposes of clarity, and I'm really trying to get an answer here.
Okay, well, let me clarify it this way. This is the only way I know to do it. I live in a small rural county. You know, poultry's big in the county where I live. If you've got poultry houses right now, if you've got 2 and you want to build 2 more, we don't have real sophisticated zoning regulations, but you have to go to the zoning board and you have to get approval to do that, and they have a hearing. I believe it's that way in a lot of other counties, and I know this bill does not impact that procedure.
And I understand that. What I'm just trying to figure out is if you have one of the 7 conditions happen, right, and somebody says, well, this condition happened, ergo the statute of limitations continues or gets reset. If one of these 7 things happen that doesn't require approval, like transfer of ownership, you know, that doesn't necessarily require approval.
Well, if you transfer ownership, that doesn't necessarily change what's going on with the operation, does it?
Understanding that, but that's one of the conditions listed. So my question is, do you have to have the condition that's listed plus it's mandatory that it be subject to some kind of approval or permitting process as well in order to reset the statute of limitations?
I can't play who's the best lawyer, but I can tell you that every county that I know of has a county commission, and if there's a challenge or they see this as a challenge and it's going to impact the people in their county, it's not going to keep them from taking any action that they need to take as far as permitting an agricultural operation, which is a business.
Will the senator yield?
Yes.
This is my issue. I agree with you. I don't think it will preclude the local zoning boards or county commissions from doing anything. What I'm talking about specifically is that there's ambiguity in this language that is actually going to create more litigation, more lawsuits, more uncertainty, and I don't think that's anything that any of us want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yield for further questions.
I will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield for some friendly questions.
I will. I need a break, by the way.
Isn't it true that I am a friend of the farmer?
That is very true.
Isn't it true that farmers like Bernard Sims, Kevin Sims, Betts Berry, and I listen to them whenever there's an issue regarding the farmer?
That's true.
Isn't it true that Walker County alone used to have over 10 dairies when I was a youngster, which wasn't that long ago, and now there are only 1 dairy in Walker County?
That's true. Believe it or not, I'm very familiar with Walker County. It's a beautiful county, by the way.
Were you Johnny Cash's roommate when he was in Walker County?
No, I'm just, my only claim to fame is I've got a roommate that's famous, but other than that.
Isn't it true that Johnny Cash was in jail at Walker County once? Is why I asked that. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that if we don't do things to help the family farmer, we will not have them much longer?
I can tell you this, the farmer needs a break.
Isn't it true that they provide our fiber and food to make sure we're healthy, and some of us a little above healthy, but to survive in this country?
If it were not for the farmer, all of us would be naked, hungry, and without shelter.
I don't know how to respond to that, Mr. Chairman, so I think I will yield from questioning after that.
Thank you.
Senator from the 52nd is recognized for a question.
I'll yield. I'm only yielding for friendly questions.
Well, will the senator yield for this?
I will.
Is it true the senator has sat with me back here for 8 years and been a great friend?
I hope that's the case. That's the way I feel.
And I've got friends that are large farmers that are for this bill. I've got some other smaller farmers that have concerns, and some others in my district.
If it would help,
and I'm trying real hard to stand with my friends.
Hey, I could suggest which friend that I think you should stand with, if that'd help any.
And if the senator would further yield, I would like to say that I would agree with the 5 mile condition. The big concerns I've heard are along the line 71, 73 or so that we're deleting, that used to say if there's a change in the size of the operation or there's a change in the type of operation, that, you know, people would have some recourse. So, you know, the argument they're telling me is you go from 5 to 5,000 acres, or you can go from soybeans to chickens, and they have no recourse. Could you address that section?
I think they still have recourse. I mean, they're still governed by EPD. They're still governed by EPA. They're still governed by the regulations in their local county.
All right. I do appreciate your work on this and your passion and what you've done for agriculture in the state of Georgia.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 8th for a question. Senator from the 8th for a question. Wrong button, that's okay. Senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I will.
I have a question about the 5 mile provision. Isn't it true that a nuisance could be defined as something that negatively impacted air or water?
You know more about that than I do, but that would seem reasonable to me.
Right, so if this toxic runoff got into water, that could go more than 5 miles, or if the air was polluted, that certainly is something that easily goes more than 5 miles and affects a wide range of people. So I'm struggling with this 5 mile thing.
What'd keep the EPD from finding them and shutting their operation down if that were the case?
Because, Senator, the EPD is government funded. We don't give them adequate funding, and they don't have enough means to individually pursue what's impacted local farms. That's why, Senator.
Okay, well, let me put it this way.
Okay.
I'm just going to say this because I want to tell you what I believe in my heart. I know a lot of Georgia farmers, and I don't think there's any Georgia farmer. First of all, farmers are stewards of the land. They make their living off the land. So they have to be good stewards. If they mistreat the land, if they do things like that, they don't stay in business. So I'm willing to say that I have enough confidence in the farmers in our state that I don't think that's going to be a challenge.
Well, would you yield for one more question?
I will. I should have quit while I was ahead.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of talk about farmers being for this, but, you know, sort of in line with what the senator from the 52nd alluded to, I don't understand then why I've heard from so many farmers and why I see so many op-eds in local papers from farmers that have farmed their land for 150 years and more that are adamantly opposed.
I would say their families that farm that land. I think if you check some of those people, some of them live 200 miles away from the farm, and they're trying to harass the people that bought the land from one of their heirs to keep them from farming it. I think that's
well, that may be one, Senator, but there have been so many that are generational farmers that find that their operations have been destroyed by large out-of-state and out-of-country ownership, waste lagoons, corporate and foreign owned. And so I guess I'm just trying to say, isn't it true that there are certainly many, many farmers that do not
Could you,
favor this
could you,
legislation.
could you name one corporate entity that has come in and done that in our state?
I think part of the debate is some of the things on both sides that have been noticed in other states, such as the situation in North Carolina with Smithfield, and I know we all know that
Was
drove
that,
some of
what
this.
state was that in? I was asking specifically about Georgia.
Well, the point is, we don't want that in Georgia. Thank you.
Yeah.
Call upon the Senator for the 7th for question.
Thank you, Mr. President. And will the distinguished Act Committee's chairman yield?
I will.
Mr. Chairman, what is on, as some of us would argue, the front, but others would say the back of the state seal of the great state of Georgia?
I know what it is, Mr. Chairman. You and agriculture, commerce.
Agriculture and commerce. That's
You and
correct.
I are on the same page. And with that said, I'm just going to say this. You know, I feel like I about beat this horse to death. All of you are smart people. I know that you're going to make your mind up. And I urge you to vote for the farmer and vote for this bill. But with that said, I'm going to yield the well. And if this thing lasts 2 or 3 more hours, it's not going to be my fault. Thank you.
Senator from the 48th. Senator from the 48th, stand by. We're going to read an amendment before we do that.
Amendment 2A by Senators Walker of the 20th and Black of the 8th. Amendment 2 by changing the word structure to subdivision on line 9 of Amendment 2.
Senator from the 48th, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a false narrative, and I'm offended by the comparison of the number of lawyers to the number of farmers. My family has a history of farming. I grew up in rural Georgia, Walker County, which was just mentioned by our Rules Chairman. This is an abomination. The current law works. The chairman himself said we've had a booming economy. Why are we changing it? We are putting our economy at risk, our great agricultural economy that this state is known for, at risk. Why? For big ag. We're selling out the small farmer. That's what we're doing, make no mistake about it. You've received hundreds of emails. I have farmers here, several well-established farmers who are against this bill. Bell Blueberry Farms, Pierce County. Clay Springs Farm, Lee County. Cox Naval Stores, Dodge County. Green Farms, Monroe and Upson County. Mark Israel Farms, Sumner and Lee County. Lee Farm, Macon and Schley County. John Marbury Farms, Lee County. Cornwell Farm, Sumter County. Mark Royal Farm, Schley County. Covey Rise Farms. And it goes on. I can't even mention them all. I've gotten thousands of emails over the year and a half or 2 years that I've been here as a senator working on the Agriculture Committee. And I personally am not a farmer, but I am a lawyer and I know how to read the law, and I'm not saying that I'm smart all the time, but this is a bad law and it doesn't work. It is based on the North Carolina law that is currently being challenged for its constitutionality. So we're going to throw ourselves into a bunch of litigation. That's what we're doing with this new law. You have the minority report at your seats. I hope you have looked at it, because I'm not going to beat a dead horse, as the chairman said. But I'm leaving this very clear with you. You also have an editorial that I was able to manage to scrounge up that had been brought before us when we were last here. I find it offensive that we have brought this bill in the darkness of night after COVID, and that those farmers can't be here today because they would be. And they have emailed us and called us frantically in the last few hours when they heard rumor of taking this bill off the table. I am standing for the farmers. I am not standing here as a lawyer. I am standing here for the farmers and for this economy, and you will answer for this vote when you go back to rural Georgia. I don't have to worry about this vote in District 48. I don't have farmers in my district, and if I do, they're urban and they're very small. But they too have reached out. But farmers across this state have made it very clear to me over and over again that this is an abomination. And if you want to sell them out, you do it, but you're going to pay for it and answer for it. I stand with the farmers. Thank you.
The senator has yielded the well, and she certainly has that right. I'd call upon the senator from the 8th to speak to his amendment.
As I've listened to the debate that we have had so far, I'm sort of reminded that we have just finished a political election. And we have had some campaigns that were run that were extremely nasty. And I mean extremely false charges were made and assertions. And I have listened to this, and so much of what we're hearing is reminiscent of the political fodder that was passed out in this last election. Totally baseless and totally misleading. I've got one amendment. I offered a couple. I'm going to withdraw the first amendment. I had a miscommunication with the Legislative Council, and we tried to correct it with a 2A, and so we're going to withdraw Amendment 2 and Amendment 3, Amendment 2A. And I think I have got what is really the issue here with Amendment 3. And all of the input that we have had from farmers that came up here back early in the session, a lot of it was driven by some farmers, very large farmers, that had some environmental problems. And these farmers have already been ordered by the EPD to make some corrections and address their problems. And as the case in most of the situations when the people have environmental problems, the EPD mandates that they correct those, and quite often they give them appropriate time to make the necessary changes. And if they don't, then there'll be additional action taken. All of the charges that have been made go back to environmental issues. And in Amendment 3, it says right here that nothing in this bill shall be preemptive or overriding any present or future rule or regulation of the Georgia Environmental Protection Division or the United States Environmental Protection Agency. This right here is the crux of all of the anti. Now, I will address my chairman from finance in his issue about the provisions that allow for the expansion of an operation. That also comes under, any expansion has to be in compliance with our environmental laws. And I was caught by the chairman from the Corps when he made mention about the crisis we just went through with the pandemic, and all of a sudden we had a shortage of toilet paper and paper towels. And I was reminded back here about 10 years ago on the adjourning of the legislature, we had Atlanta snowed under. And we came up here, they had to get four-wheel drive trucks to come get us, those officers up here, to get a quorum in to swear the governor in, and we adjourned for 3 days. And I live in a condo when we're in section up here that's just a few blocks from a Publix. And we got in there on Sunday and we went down and picked us up some knickknacks and stuff to have in our condo, but planning on not doing a lot of eating. We didn't have much groceries. And I lived on knickknacks at Monday, and by Tuesday morning, I was ready for some substance. And it happened to be that one of my colleagues up here had a four-wheel drive pickup. And that four-wheel drive was the only thing that you could move around the streets of Atlanta in. And we drove up to the Publix right up there at Piedmont. And the shelves were about 80% empty. And the people that live in that area had walked down there and toted that grocery store out. And that's just how fast our food supply can be dissipated. Folks, we are very dependent on the farmers. And this bill right here is needed. We also need our environmental protection. We've got that. If the EPD is not doing their job, that's another issue. Let's address it. But let's get this bill passed. And I appreciate if you'd support this Amendment 3 that I have. Thank you. I'll entertain any questions.
Senator, you have no questions. Senator Stone, Senator from the 23rd, speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, as many of you may know, I come from a very agricultural section of the state. Burke County is the second largest county in Georgia. We produce cotton, corn, peanuts, soybeans. We have some of the largest dairies, pecan orchards, blueberry farms, cattle operations. My whole family is involved in farming. I married a farmer's daughter, and her father was assistant director of Extension Service, the same employer that our esteemed agricultural chair worked for many years. I think we need a strong right to farm law, but we don't need to overly complicate it. And in all my years as a lawyer, I have represented farmers for over 30 years. My niche is in that area. I was chairman of the ag section of the state bar. So I'm not trying to weaken this bill in any way. We need to have a clear statute of limitations, and it needs to be short. Now, it was pointed out to me by some of my colleagues on my side of the aisle that the anomaly that can happen here is that a change of operation brought about by a issuance of a new permit triggers a period, an important period under the language of this law. And the alleged nuisance has to occur within 2 years of that change. So this ignores the situation where a permit can be issued. Now, I know some have time limits on them, but it takes time to gear up to scale. But a permit can be issued and the nuisance not start occurring until that 2-year period is up. And then there's no accrual time for anything. So all this amendment does is clarify that the 2-year statute of limitations begins from the time of the occurrence of the nuisance. You know, we pass complicated laws that have unintended consequences. We don't want to go down that path with this bill. I strongly support the bill with this clarification, and I hope you'll join me in voting for Amendment 1. Mr. President, I'll be happy to yield for questions.
Call upon the senator from the 17th for a question.
The senator yield.
Yes.
A question for you, and this was, I know not your intent with this amendment, but I'm afraid there could be an unintended consequence here. I mentioned you a minute ago offline. When we strike line 109 and we take away the protection and take away the part that deals with an operation that's already going on for 2 years, given the fact we're also striking in the bill itself lines 105 and 106, are we not creating a situation where if the bill passes with your amendment, that we're going to eliminate the protection that existing farms have under current law, with the idea that if you come to the nuisance,
I think, to answer your question, if I may, the common law, that's the law that's been passed down through the centuries from our English forefathers and people who established the doctrine of nuisance in the first place, have always recognized that if you move to the nuisance, your rights are limited if you come to the nuisance. And I think even though this bill takes out some statutory provisions related to that, that common law is still in effect.
do you further yield?
Yes.
I don't disagree with you on the common law, but I think it's important to point out it's codified now. There's a protection, especially in districts like mine where you have farms mixing with urban sprawl. And currently under law, someone can't move to a neighboring farm and then bring a suit against them and they come to the nuisance. I'm afraid if we support amendment number 1, we're going to require people to rely on old common law versus a statutory protection. And we may actually open up more lawsuits against farms in metro areas.
Well, that might be a reason to vote against the bill, because the bill strikes that language.
Also a reason to vote against the amendment as well, right?
Any further questions?
Senator from the 7th is called on for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Judiciary Chairman yield?
Of course.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the senator from the 17th and the concern that he has, and I will just tell you, I believe that is it not true that I believe that your amendment would gut the provisions of this bill and gut the underlying protections, especially that we have in our right to farm statute, but more importantly, it would completely gut the establishment of this bill. And I know you may disagree with that, but is it not true that that is my opinion?
Well, I'm not a mind reader,
Like that.
Senator.
I understood you talked about the 2-year statute of limitations. Your amendment specifically takes that out of this bill. And I believe if your intent was to leave the ability to have a 2-year statute of limitations, that maybe we need to revisit in the way that maybe your amendment has been drafted, because there will no longer be a 2-year time clock once that establishment of that operation commences.
The 2-year time clock that you're referring to, that the amendment deletes, is that the requirement that a nuisance actually occur within that 2-year window.
That's correct.
Not that the lawsuit has to be brought within 2 years.
That is correct. So if I may further ask, is it not true that every time I put a set of harrows in the ground on a farm, would that constitute a new event or a new action?
No.
Why would it? Why I would ask then, why would that not?
Those are ordinary activities inherent to farming, and they do not constitute a nuisance. A nuisance has to involve discharge of obnoxious odors or liquids that damage someone else's property.
Okay, so with that example then, I'll use the example of spreading chicken fertilizer. We do that a lot in rural South Georgia. If I don't have a 2-year time clock and I have an established operation, is it not true that in year 3, if I was to spread chicken manure on my farm, because it does create an extensive odor that I would agree with, to your definition of that, in the way that you just established the understanding of what a nuisance is, would that not also constitute claim to file a lawsuit for nuisance then at that point?
Well, if it met all the other criteria for nuisances, but...
So the purpose of the 2-year time clock is to protect the farming operation and the agricultural operation from a perpetual time clock that never ends. If I'm clear in that statement. And removing the 2-year time clock, is it not true that there is a possibility of a perpetual nature under Georgia law that could create a perpetual situation where you could find yourself in where lawsuits could be filed forever, even on an operation that never changes its size, that never changes the type of operation that it is, that never expands its facilities, etc.?
If a nuisance has been occurring ongoing, like in your case, the application of fertilizer, the clock's already been, from the day you started doing that 2-year statute of limitations started running.
That's correct, but the way I understand your amendment is it would take out that 2-year statute where a claim can be brought, and because it does that, it creates a perpetual situation where claims can be brought in year 10, year 15, year 20 of the same identical operation.
The wording without the language that's deleted is that the action is filed within 2 years after the nuisance occurs. So if there's been a continuing nuisance that's been occurring for 10 years.
That is correct.
That would not.
But you're taking out the protection of the 2 years after the establishment of the operation, and where that operation has a protection against nuisance claims for something that it continually does on a year-by-year basis. Is that not true?
Only if it had started occurring within the 2-year statute of limitations period. If it's beyond 2 years, it would not be actionable. If you had that operation going for 8 years or even two years and 1 day.
But Senator, if I may, the way I understand your amendment, and I'll finish with this statement, because I think we have maybe a misunderstanding of each other. Is it not true that the way your amendment reads, though, by taking out that 2-year protection time period, even though there is a 2-year period where a suit can be filed, the agricultural operation no longer has that period of 2 years where it establishes itself as an agricultural operation not to be protected from nuisance claims going forward?
I disagree. If the way this bill is written now, if there's been a change in operation of permit and no activities occurred during the first 2 years, that ends any nuisance claim. But there wasn't a nuisance claim to begin with until the operation started. What we're concerned about is a permit being issued, nothing occurs within the 2 years to create a nuisance, and then a nuisance starts. It's out of bounds from day one, out of the limitations under this bill the way it's worded.
Thank you, Senator. Anything else? Call upon the Senator from the 3rd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Senator yield for a series of questions?
Certainly.
Senator, isn't it true that the state of Georgia has invested a lot in its Georgia Grown program?
Absolutely. I've invested a lot in our Georgia Grown program.
And we've passed laws to encourage agritourism.
Yes.
And so,
I've supported all that.
And there are a lot of small and medium-sized farmers that participate in those programs.
They're all sizes.
And I'd like to ask you a hypothetical question of what would happen if your amendment does not pass to one of these smaller farmers. Let's suppose that a larger operation comes in and buys a tract of land and they get their permit to start their operations. And then because of just the time that it takes to develop that operation and to get all of the infrastructure in place, they really don't start until almost 18 months, close to 2 years after the permit was granted. But then once they get up to full-blown operations 2.5 years later, the nuisance is such that it's damaging the smaller farmers that are around here.
Without this amendment, the smaller farmers in the neighborhood would be without any course of action.
Thank you.
Call upon the senator from the 18th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Yes.
Senator, I don't want to cover everything. I think the senator from the 7th and the senator from Ocilla really covered a lot of the questions that I had, so I don't want to replow that ground with you. But it seems to me that the heart of the policy behind this is to give protection for farmers that have been operating at a particular location for a long time. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I think anything beyond 2 years is protected if there's no action filed within 2 years.
But Senator, I'm afraid that I read your amendment by striking the language that it proposes to strike would effectively remove that "I was here first and therefore deserve some protection." And my question is that the intent of your amendment?
That's not the intent of our amendment, but that was stricken from the law by the bill.
Senator, I guess I don't read that. I think that the 2-year date that is in there that's inserted at 108 and 109 and 110, I think provides that. But my question was what your intent was, and so I appreciate you answering it. Thank you.
Call upon senator from the 41st. Whoop.
Senator Yield?
Yes.
Just want to reiterate a point I thought you brought up earlier, but Senator from the 7th might have said something that confused me. Didn't you say already existing law already that if there's a nuisance and you move to the nuisance, then the farmer is protected? If you move into their area, you're protected, right?
Yeah, that's court recognized. Mr. President, if there are no further questions.
You have one remaining question. Senator from 36th.
Thank you, Mr. President. The gentleman yield.
Yes.
Thank you for your efforts to make this bill less onerous, which I believe your amendment does. Are you familiar, and I hope others are as well, with what happened in North Carolina with these huge commercial Chinese-owned hog farm operations?
Vaguely. I know that during the hurricane, a lot of them overflowed into neighboring streams.
That's exactly right. That's what I was referring to. The record is out there. We don't have to imagine what happens when these large commercial scale operations get set up. And it was set up by a senator at the time, isn't it true, that served in the North Carolina legislature and got the laws fixed to allow these operations to just go hog wild up there.
I'm not a...
That's right. That is what happened. And then, and I know personally people who live downstream from that, and entire communities that were wrecked from the overflowing of those sludge
affluent
cesspool. Yeah, the animal waste that just flowed into into the waterways, all down through that eastern North Carolina area. And so that's why there's such a concern. That's why the environmental community, many of us love to have the support of the environmental community. That's why they're completely opposed to the direction of this bill. That's why in Utah they defeated this bill. In Wisconsin that this bill was defeated. So isn't it true that we need to take a very, very close look at this bill? And it's been stuck for a reason. There are huge concerns about people's access to the to get justice in the courts.
Yeah, well, I'm not opposed to what's called industrial agriculture, but we do have to respect all property rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I yield the well.
So the senator from the 36 and Donald Trump have something in common: China. Senator from the 20th, if you'll speak to your amendment.
Mr. President, Amendment 2A was my amendment, but Senator the senator from the 8th withdrew his amendment number 2, and I withdraw my amendment 2A. So I rise actually in support of the Senate substitute for House Bill 545. I don't come down to the well a whole lot. I don't particularly feel the need to, and I'm not super fond of public speaking. It's a little intimidating up here to me. Still, but in my 4.5 years of serving in this august body, I've never spent as much time on any issue or any bill than I have on this bill. House Bill 545 came to the Ag Committee in 2019, and I actually voted against the House version in committee. So I am not for giving just blanket immunity to farmers. I do respect individual property rights, and I think we worked very, very hard under the Ag Chairman's leadership to reach a good balance. I met with all the ag interests, the Georgia Farm Bureau, Georgia Agribusiness Council, Georgia Forestry Association, Georgia Cattlemen's Association, Georgia Poultry Federation. I got their input, but I also met with a lot of environmental interests. I met with several river keepers, people representing environmental interests, and I believe we've crafted a good balance that is very fair. Let me tell you, I do have farmers in my district. Unlike the senator from the 48th, who I certainly admire and appreciate and like, I have farmers in my district. It's a big part of our economy. Georgia we pride ourselves on being the #1 state in the nation to do business, and our #1 business is agribusiness. If we're going to have economic development opportunities in the part of the state that I live in, and many of my colleagues here live in, it's probably going to have something to do with agriculture. It's very, very important. I've worked in the farm equipment business. I know a lot of farmers, grew up around farming, and this is what I know about farmers. They are resilient people. They are hard-working people. They are people generally of deep faith. You have to have a lot of faith to be a farmer. You have to have the faith to put a seed in the ground and hope that you're going to get the right weather conditions and the right circumstances to yield a crop and be able to bring that crop in, and then you don't know what price you're going to get for it when you do all that. It takes a tremendous amount of inputs now to farm. It is a very, very expensive and capital-intensive business. The Georgia farmer has been beaten and beaten and beaten. We had Hurricane Irma. We had Hurricane Michael. We had a trade war and tariffs. The Georgia farmer is suffering. and they do not need the uncertainty of the potential for a nuisance lawsuit. They don't need that. They can't invest the millions of dollars that oftentimes they have to invest with that kind of uncertainty on top of all the other uncertainties, weather, input cost, commodity prices. They just can't continue. So this bill is intended to bring some certainty for agribusiness in Georgia. I think if never before have we had a better example of how vulnerable our food supply chain is than when we have had the pandemic. For weeks and weeks and weeks, the big Kroger that we shop at in Houston County had no chicken, no meat, no beef, very little pork. A lot of the shelves were bare. I mean, for weeks. And we've already heard mention of the toilet paper and paper towels and paper products. We need to support and encourage local grown, Georgia grown products so that we have a good, stable, and safe source of food and fiber here in Georgia. I also want to address Amendment 1. I think if we adopt Amendment 1, then we go really right back to the situation we're in currently, which is an uncertainty and sort of an ongoing opportunity for nuisance lawsuits to be brought. The bill, I believe, is very clear that the nuisance has to occur within the 2 years of the established, on line 114, the established date of operation, which is the time in which the operation commences. So you've got a 2-year time span for the nuisance to be seen or observed or cause a problem. And I think that's a long enough time. And we're talking also, let's don't conflate, a lot of the debate and questions are talking about environmental issues and Clean Water Act issues. Let's don't conflate what this bill is about. It's about odor, it's about dust, it's about noise, maybe potentially light. It's about nuisances. It's not about clean water. It's not about violating environmental law. So I don't want us to conflate that. A lot of work has gone into this. Talking about the environmental, I do support Amendment number 3. I think it makes it abundantly clear that we're not going to supersede the authority of the Georgia Environmental Protection Division or the EPA. We were careful to craft into this bill, starting on line 133 through, I believe, 142, situations that would reset, so to speak, the statute of limitations clock. And this is to be fair to the surrounding property owners and to be balanced, like what we intend to do here. So if a operation grows, and let's say it's a poultry operation and they build new chicken houses, they're going to have to get a permit from the Georgia Department of Agriculture to do that, to expand their chicken house operation. That's going to reset the clock on the 2-year statute of limitations. I don't know what other example, but if you expand greatly, you're going to have to get local ordinances is going to come into play, local permitting. You're going to have to get a land disturbance permit from EPD. All of those things reset the clock on the 2-year statute of limitations for the nuisance. So I urge you to please support the bill and to vote against Amendment number 1, vote in favor of Amendment number 3, and support our Georgia farmer so that they can continue to provide food and fiber for our families. Thank you.
I call upon the senator from the 8th.
President, I ask that we withdraw Amendment 2.
Is there objection to the withdrawal of Amendment 2? Hearing no objection, Amendment 2 is withdrawn. Consequently, Amendment 2A is moot. Any other senator wish to speak to the bill? Call upon the senator from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I know all of you know my passion for public safety in our state, but I think you all know my equal passion for our state's bedrock industry, and that's agriculture. I asked the senator from the 50th, the distinguished Ag Committee chairman, about our state seal a few minutes ago. And I think it goes to show the importance of this industry to our state when it's embedded on the seal of our state. If you've never looked at the seal of the state of Georgia, some would say it's the front, some would say it's the back, but agriculture and commerce is displayed prominently on the state seal of our great state. And you know, when the Georgia General Assembly was established, if you think about the time frame in which we meet in Atlanta, that is the time frame in which agriculture is the most slow in our state, except for some livestock operations, among other things. But your row crop operations and a lot of your other agricultural pursuits are in full swing during the rest of the year. And the reason we meet in January and February and March is because at that time there were a number of individuals that served in this body, that sat in these chairs, that sat across the hall, that were involved intently in the agricultural industry in our state. And I think it incumbent upon us to remember that our state is built on this bedrock. Our state is built on this industry. Our state would not be what it is today without agriculture. It's our number one industry. It's the lifeblood of our economy. We are the number one state in do business, and that's a lot of because of the industry in which we are so proud to say has continued to serve as our state's number one economic driver for a number of years. Over the time period that this General Assembly has been established, more and more frequently it becomes where individuals are further and further removed from the farm. That goes into conversations we have in the public sphere, whether we want to talk about GMOs or other issues related to agriculture, where the consumer doesn't have a full understanding of what agriculture and the farming community and what it's based in and what it's about. Because of that disconnect that we have, and because of the disconnect of our consumers, and even because of the disconnect of a lot of times in people that serve in elected office, there's a misunderstanding of what it actually means to participate in that industry and where our food comes from. And I know a lot of my colleagues that serve in this chamber that aren't directly involved in agriculture have that respect, and they know those type of things. So please don't take my comments to disparage you because you may not be actively involved in agriculture. That in no way is what I intend by my comments today, because I know a lot of you have a passion for this industry like I do and so many others do in this chamber. But today I just want to speak really quick to a lot of the conversation that has been had in the back and forth that we've had, and hopefully address some of the questions that have been raised by a number of the members in this body. I think we have to understand where we started, because there are a lot of misconceptions that are floating around about this particular piece of legislation. I know North Carolina was referenced a few minutes ago by the senator from the 36th. And we have to remember that in that North Carolina lawsuit where the federal judge shot down the North Carolina right to farm law, he actually, in his ruling, referenced the Georgia right to farm law in his reasoning for striking down the North Carolina right to farm law. So that in of itself showed us in Georgia that maybe we need to revisit what we do in our state and how we protect our farmers and how we protect our state's number one industry, and we need to go back and look at what we're doing. That's where this come from, and we did that. There was ambiguity under the current law. There is ambiguity under the current law. This fixes that. This fixes the ambiguity that is under the current law that the federal judge determined was the problem with the North Carolina lawsuit. I will tell you, the reason North Carolina is probably still in a lawsuit is because the trial attorneys and the lawyers and all of those that were successful in tearing down the current right to farm law, we're not happy that the North Carolina legislature fixed the problem. And that's what we're trying to do today, is we're trying to fix that issue in our state. A couple of things 545 does. It provides farm neighbors recourse to object to new farm operations. That is clear. It protects farms after they've been in operation for 2 years, but allows another 2 years for suits to be filed. It gives a clear timeline of when a farm operation is established and when right to farm protections can be claimed in reference to a nuisance claim. It sets clear standards when a farm established date of operation resets and loses its right to farm protection. Most importantly, as I've stated, it preserves our state's #1 industry. What it doesn't do, it does not impact local government zoning authority. It does not limit anybody's ability to bring a nuisance claim within a 4-year statute of limitation if right to farm protection is not granted. If that protection is granted, there is still up to 4 years a neighbor can sue from the farm's established date of operations for which a nuisance occurred within the first 2 years. It does not provide blanket immunity for farmers. Anyone can bring a nuisance suit against an operation, and a farmer must prove before the judge the defense of a right to farm, that they have been established for 2 years, the operation has not undergone any changes as established in the legislation, and they were not operating improperly, negligently, or illegally. It gives protection. It does not give protection when they are negligent. It does not protect bad actors, and it does not change environmental standards. That is clear, especially with Amendment number 3 by the senator from the 8th, that is not what this bill does. Our rural economy in our state, even though our state has boomed over the last couple of years, and I know we've kind of hit a speed bump right here with COVID-19, but our rural economy is still not up to par with where the rest of the state has gone. The way we continue to make sure rural Georgia its economy continues to be successful is we continue to pass policies that support our rural part of our state and the lifeblood of that part of our state, and that's what this bill attempts to do. I'm going to hit on a couple of things really quick because I think these were brought up in the conversation that maybe I haven't hit on already. I know the senator from the 52nd referenced to the changed conditions in the bill and the fact that if you change an operation that you would not be able to sue. Actually, under the old law, you still were able to sue, and this does not change the fact that you can do that. It fixes the changed conditions. It strikes that out in lines 70 through 82, and it reestablishes those conditions in line 122 through 132. I believe there was a misunderstanding that this would now allow you to not be able to sue under the old law. You couldn't sue under that condition that he raised a few minutes ago anyway. I know the senator from the 50th and others have addressed the ads that have been in the paper. A number of those individuals, you'll find it interesting. If you go pull the lawsuit, there's a list of names about this long on that lawsuit, and every one of those names is in that lawsuit. I think that's interesting. That those individuals are the ones that are putting ads in everybody's paper to try to fight a bill when they're the ones in the middle of a lawsuit. I think it's important also to point out that we do have trespass laws in our state. And if there's something that you do in your operation, it is not protected by the right to farm bill if it is considered a trespass. And I think that's an important distinction that we have to make sure that people understand, that this does not protect that. In no way, shape, or form protect the ability for somebody to sue based on trespass. I respect my good friend from the senator from the 48th. Her and I surprisingly disagree. I don't believe that this is a hurts small farmers. I wholeheartedly believe this protects all of agriculture, not just the big farmers as she portrayed earlier. I really believe in my heart of hearts this protects every person that is involved in agriculture across our state. And to the amendments, I know I've had that conversation with the senator from the 23rd a few minutes ago. I do not support Amendment 1. I do support Amendment 3. And I disagree with the standpoint of the 2-year time frame, but I believe the argument really should be over, Senator, and I should have brought this up when you and I were having this conversation. Maybe the argument and the discussion should have been over what is the established date of operation. And I think that's been some of the contention that we've had in here. Does getting a permit and just pulling a permit establish a date of operation? I will tell you first and foremost, I don't know a farmer or an agricultural producer in this state that's going to spend a ton of capital in trying to get their operation established and get a permit and sit on it for 2 years. In the agriculture industry, the capital doesn't work that way. That's a misunderstanding of how capital works, especially when you're talking about our food and fiber and our farmers. They have got to have an established operation to recoup that capital that they've expended. Secondly, I'll point you to line 45. Agricultural operation means the following: plowing, tilling, planting, application of pesticides and herbicides, breeding, hatching, production of honeybees, production of eggs, manufacturing of feed for poultry, rotation of crops, commercial aquaculture. It does not mean pulling a permit. So I would argue, and I'm not a lawyer, but I almost stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I would argue that the 2-year clock would start when that operation begins, not when you pull a permit, but when you actually begin the operation. And that operation in the beginning, agricultural operation, is clearly defined in this legislation. And I believe that takes care of that concern. Mr. President, I support the bill, obviously. I would encourage my colleagues to support this bill, support our state's #1 industry. I encourage you to vote against Amendment number 1. I encourage you to vote for Amendment 3. And at this time, Mr. President, without belaboring the point, I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. I call upon a senator from the 12th.
Mr. President, Mr. Leader, like the senator from the 20th, I'll be very brief. And I don't frequent the well that often unless I feel that there's an inherent danger to my district and other Georgians that are not a part of District 12. And I certainly won't be as long as Senator from the 12th. 7th. Well, that's me, right? Okay. My good friend. Was my good friend.
Senator yields the will.
This bill, I've fought long and hard to oppose it. And I've not spoken very much to any of those that the senator from the 20th referenced. None of the big businesses. I talked to regular farmers and landowners about the situation. And without a doubt, we know that HB 545 would give industrial farming operations a free pass to come into existing rural communities and create nuisances that would disturb long-standing rural communities where farmers and residents coexist. The mistakes that we make so often in this chamber, I'm beginning to see, is that we don't talk to those people that are at the forefront of the problems that we're trying to solve or trying to help them solve. And most times we tend to create more than we do help. And that's disturbing. This bill started out pretty much as a rule fix for a large industrial farm in Sumter County, and it just kind of morphed into something much, much larger across the state. The senator from the 8th talked about the EPA being the solver of the issues of noise, polluted creeks, streams, and land. He also mentioned that during the pandemic, there was toilet tissue that we didn't have enough of that. The problem was not the fact that there wasn't enough, it was people were hoarders and they were greedy. And this bill speaks to me the same way. There's greed in what's going on with these farmers and dismissing of landowners and their concerns. And we also know that the EPA or the EPD can take years to resolve issues. So in the meantime, what do these landowners and farmers do, waiting for EPE, EPD, and EPA to render some kind of decision about what's going on? Yes, we would love to be able to depend upon the agencies that regulate, but that's not true anymore. We find so many times that we wait and we wait and we ask these individuals, just wait a little longer and we'll have a remedy for you. We'll have an answer for you, but it never comes, or it comes too late. These are not just my farmers. All of us have a stake in this. And at the end of the day, we have to go back home and give an explanation to these ladies and gentlemen that are landowners and farmers. Having said that, I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. Chair calls upon the senator from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be even more brief than the senator from the 12th. Senators, I listened to this debate today. I listened to it earlier this year. And from what I've gathered, the opposition to this bill comes from you senators that live in or near urban areas, or you're in a high growth area, maybe where there's a lot of suburban sprawl. I grew up on a farm. Have any of y'all vaccinated baby chickens? Have you ever picked up 10,000 eggs a day by hand? Have you ever shoveled chicken manure? Have you ever shoveled cow manure? Have you ever birthed a baby calf? Have you ever milked a dairy cow by hand? Have you ever castrated baby pigs? I've done all of that growing up on a farm. And I remember as a child the growth that was coming up out of Atlanta up to Dahlonega. 65 miles from where we are today is where I grew up. Before Georgia 400 was built, there were no big subdivisions. There's still not a lot of big subdivisions today, but what we do have is a lot of people moving out of Atlanta, moving into these suburban markets, moving into these rural areas, and they're developing around these existing farms. If we don't protect our farms in Georgia, where are you going to get your food? You've heard all these eloquent arguments. You've heard legal scholars up here talking about zoning issues. This bill doesn't impact any local regulations at the county level whatsoever. I was a county commissioner. I was a sole commissioner. I put in land use regulations to protect my farmers in Lumpkin County. This legislation is important. Why do I support it? It's because every agricultural agency and association in Georgia is for it. And because our chairman of this committee that is so important to this state and this industry that we call agriculture, he is for it. He's been so passionate for this bill for 2 years now. We have to support our chairman. We have to support our major industries in this state. How could you vote against it if all of these industries are for this? It's not for the corporate Chinese farms. If it is, then we'll change the bill next year. Senators, let's pass this bill. Let's support this chairman that's leaving here this year. And let's send a strong message throughout our state that we are going to stand behind the #1 industry in our state, and that's agriculture. So please vote for this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from the 48th, would you have spoken to the minority report, have you not?
That's correct.
Senator from the 50th, would you care to close the debate? Senator from the 50th, please stand by just for a moment. Senator from the 48th, did you require to speak? I thought you were waving off. You'll wave, okay. You can't wave, the secretary tells us. You cannot wait. If you're going to speak, you have to speak now. My apologies, Senator from the 50th. Senator from the 48th, you'll speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I may have confused a few things, but I've made my position clear, and I believe everyone here has made their position clear. I will say, I do hope and pray that those of you who have spoken as farmers are true and correct in your assessment of this law. I do not agree. I have done many of the things that the good senator from the 51st spoke of. I have lived on the land. I have had animals and chickens. Those are some of the greatest memories of my life. I'm very concerned that Legislative Council has recognized that this bill can result in an unconstitutional taking of private property. And I am concerned that upon leaving this body, I'm going to have a whole new practice area of law by virtue of my service on the great Agriculture Committee. And I do hope and pray that you are correct. But I, for myself, say that you should vote against this bill, and I believe that is the correct course of action. Thank you.
Call upon the senator from the 50th to close the debate.
I grew up attending a small church, and our pastor always usually had 3 points. So I'm going to try to have 3 concise points to end with. My first point, I'm going to try to paraphrase what President Dwight Eisenhower said 53 years ago, and this is how I would paraphrase his quote. He referenced synthetic farmers behind Atlanta desk who love to tell real farmers what to do and how to do it. And quoting President Eisenhower, you know, farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 200 miles from the cornfield. So that's my first comment. My second comment, if you have any doubt about how the farm community or the agriculture community feels about this bill, I would point out that the largest farm organization in our state, the Georgia Farm Bureau, and their members in every county in this state except one. There's only one county in our state that doesn't have a Farm Bureau office, and that's Chattahoochee County. But every one of those counties support this legislation. The Georgia Agribusiness Council, composed of businesses and farmers from all over our great state, support this legislation. The Georgia Cattlemen's Association, the Georgia Poultry Federation. There is not one agricultural entity in our state that opposes this legislation. That should tell you something. And then finally, point 3, Senator from the 48th, I commend you on your service on the Agriculture Committee. You and I have shared some similar experiences. So I say this in love, but you know, I stood up here and let people smarter than me, like you, pummel me today with the questions. And all I wanted was a point of clarification if I'd had the opportunity to ask you a question, because, you know, when I was talking around about going around knowing these farmers and meeting them and those kind of things, my question would be, now, I've been to all those counties, and I'm familiar with Sly County, but what about Slade County? Now, I've never been to that one. Thank you. I urge your support of this bill.
The senator from the 50th knows of what he speaks. We will address the amendments. Amendment number 1. Is there objection to amendment number 1? Mr. Secretary, there's objection to amendment number 1. If the Secretary will unlock the machines, I was waiting for the minority leader to give me the okay sign for a hand vote. He's not. Mr. Secretary, unlock the machines. All senators, please vote their machine. All senators, vote your machine. I guess it goes. All senators, vote your machine, please. All senators, vote your machine, please. All senators, vote your machine. All senators, vote your machine. All senators voting your machines. All senators voting your machine. All points bulletin for Senator Unterman. If all senators have voted their machine, we will lock the machines. Mr. Secretary, lock machines, please. The yeas are 28, the nays are 1, and Amendment 1 has been adopted. The question now is on Amendment number 3. Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Gentleman from the 20th.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President.
And your inquiry is?
28 votes passes an amendment.
Yes, sir. The majority of votes on the amendment passes it.
Thank you.
Majority of the quorum. There you go. You got to have a quorum. The question is on Amendment number 3. Is there objection? Hearing no objection, and number 3 is adopted. The question is on the substitute as amended. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute as amended. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute as amended? We'll be voting on it, Mr. Secretary, if you'll unlock the machines. All those in favor of final adoption will vote yes. This is not final passage. The senator from the 48th objected to the adoption of the substitute. So the question is on the adoption of the substitute. If the substitute fails, we do what? We go to the original bill. The question is on the adoption of the substitute. If the substitute fails, you go to the original bill. You withdraw your objection. Is there objection to the adoption of the substitute as amended? Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute as amended? Hearing none, the committee substitute as amended is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none. The main question is now ordered. The question is on the adoption of the bill by substitute. All those in favor vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. Mr. Secretary, unlock machines. Woo! All senators, vote your machine, please. All senators, vote your machine. Call upon the senator from the 50th. Why do you rise?
Mr. President, is it not true that a yes vote is a vote for the farmers in our great state of Georgia and the #1 industry in our state?
I'm sure the senator knows. The great agriculture chair knows of what he speaks. Senator from the 48th, why do you rise?
Pardon me,
state your inquiry.
Well, actually, no, point of order.
Point of order.
Isn't it true voting no protects the farmers of Georgia and the #1 business of this state?
I'm sure the senator from the 48th knows of what she speaks. Have all senators voted their machine? Have all senators voted their machine? All senators having voted their machines. We're going to give it one more minute. All senators, vote your machine. If all senators have voted, we are ready to close the machine. All senators having voted their machine. Mr. Secretary, close the machines. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 29 and the nays are 21. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Ag Chairman, I'm sorry I didn't get to vote. Senators, stand by. We have one more action before we adjourn. Wait a minute. I'll recognize the Senator from the 51st for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate agrees to the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 105.
The Senator from the 51st has moved to agree to the amendment to the Senate substitute of HB 105. Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption.
House Bill 105 by Representative Watson of the 172nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia related to the imposition, rate, computation, and exemptions from state income tax to exempt from state income tax certain income related received by taxpayers as payment for a disaster or assistance program in connection with Hurricane Michael. The House has amended or offers the following amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 105 by deleting all matters from line 1 to the end and replacing it with the following: to amend Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia related to revenue taxation to exempt from state income tax certain income tax received by taxpayers as payment from federal disaster relief, to provide for new excise tax on certain sales of transportation, to provide for intended disposition of those proceeds, for reporting of certain information, to provide for legislative intent, to provide for a penalty, to provide for automatic repeal, to provide for quarterly reporting, to provide for when the public disclosure is required under open records requirements relating to motor vehicle license fees, classes, and excise tax on rooms, lodging, and accommodation respectively. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Recognize the Senator from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, we're going to talk about a little bit of farm relief. This bill is going to be a bill that I think everyone can support. If you recall, we've already passed this bill once this year. This gives the income tax relief to the farmers of Southwest Georgia who receive the federal assistance from the federal government. This exempts the state income tax from that FEMA storm relief for Southwest Georgia. In addition to that, it repeals the sales tax on all ride shares in Georgia. Gets rid of the 8 and the 9% sales tax that's being applied here locally through the Marketplace Facilitator bill, but it replaces that 8% sales tax with a 50-cent and a 25-cent excise fee. And so it is a tax reduction to the bottom line, but the revenues will be dedicated to transportation to include a cap for transit. And so the House passed the amendment that has the dedicated language in it. It comes back to us. We believe this is a good way to budget for our transit operations in Atlanta. It dedicates that revenue from the rideshare fees to transportation projects to include transit. That's all the bill does. Mr. President, I'm happy to take questions.
Recognize the Senator from the 26th for a question.
Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
Will this include ride share and dedicate for them to put 25 cent or 50 cent per ride with Uber and all of these others?
Yes, sir. It replaces the sales tax. So the sales tax will be repealed under this language, and it's replaced with a flat 50 cent for one rider and then 25 cents per person if there's more than one person in the car.
Senator, you have no further questions. Senator Henson, you have a question or you want to come to the front?
If I could, I would do both, Mr. President. I would like to ask a question first.
Recognize you for a question.
Would the senator yield?
Sure.
So is there any tax toward transit from things outside jurisdictions that already have a transit component in their taxes? So if you're statewide with commercial vehicles or anything like that, is there any money going to our transit programs?
I'm not aware of any dedicated revenues going to transit. Taxis pay a tax, and the rideshare companies have argued in the past that they did not have to pay the tax, but under the marketplace facilitator, we believe it was clear that they would be eligible or be required to pay as of April 1st. That's the urgency in getting this taken care of now, to where we can clear all that ambiguity up and move forward, and also to dedicate this revenue toward those transportation projects.
Further yield, Senator?
Yes, I will.
Save my trip to the well. But in counties that do have transit taxes like the MARTA and would normally get sales tax revenue, the part of the revenue they would normally get will be replaced by part of this 50-cent fee
That will be up
going
to,
in those counties.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The future generation, the future General Assemblies will have the ability to appropriate as much of the funds as they deem necessary for the transit operations, such as the ATL and Greta and others. This does not impact the MARTA tax whatsoever that's being collected in DeKalb and Fulton counties.
Senator, further yield for one last question.
Yes.
Is it not true that although this bill is engrossed, one reason that some people aren't objecting to amending it at this time is because we know that would go to conference, and this delicate structure is done and it is fairly complete as is, and would not want to risk in this late day messing
Yes,
it up.
Time is of the essence. Thank you. I'll yield the well.
Does any other senator wish to speak to the bill? Seeing none. The question is on the motion. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. Mr. Secretary, if you unlock machines. Mr. Secretary, you can unlock the machines. Lock the machines, rather. Yes, lock the machines. On the passage of agreeing to HB 105, the yeas are 41 and the nays are 3. This has been agreed to. Call upon the senator from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we immediately transmit HB 105 to the House.
Is there objection to immediate transmittal? Hearing none, Mr. Secretary, if you'll immediately transmit. Recognize Senator from the 51st.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 o'clock a.m. on Friday, June 19th, 2020.
The senator from the 51st has moved to adjourn. Before that adjournment vote is taken, I'd like to thank each and every senator for their patience today. We had a long day, and we will have several more long days. I'd like to remind each and every senator, when he or she comes to the well for a point of personal privilege, it is out of courtesy and respect that those in the chamber pay attention to the individual in the well, and the individual in the well, out of courtesy and respect, adhere to the time limits. This courtesy and respect builds good relations, in which we all are in favor. All those in favor of adjournment will say yea. Those opposed will say nay. Those opposed? Mr. Secretary, if you'll read the announcements, and then we will adjourn.
Higher Education Committee meeting has been canceled. Government Oversight will meet in Mez 1 at 2 o'clock. Finance Committee will meet in 450 of the Capitol at 3:15. Insurance and Labor will meet in 307 of CLOB at 3:15. The Science and Technology Committee meeting has been canceled. Regulated Industries will meet in 450 of the Capitol at 4:30. The Judiciary Committee will meet in room 307 of CLOB at 5:45. The Transportation Committee will meet in room 450 of the Capitol at 5:45, and the Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment in 450 of the Capitol. That completes the order, Mr. President.
If there is no objection, we stand adjourned.